The prototype version of the Termogent Forest seen in Blood Omen Alpha is very different from the retail version of the area, but there are some basic elements that remain. The beginnings of a heavily forested area in central Nosgoth, which hides Vorador's mansion, and also 3 major dungeons, or the 3 keeps as their name guides. Whereas the retail version ends up presenting a hazardous marshy and watery area with a few wetland trees, the Alpha has the area presented in a much more straightforward fashion, with the regular heavy forest areas barring entry beyond the mud and grass trails threading between them. It's also interesting to note that, like the Lake of the Dead, the area of the Termigent Forest undergoes an alignment change. The tiles are arranged vertically, north to south in the Alphas, whereas the retail version has them arranged horizontally, east to west. 3 buildings can be seen on the map, corresponding to the 3 main keeps of the retail version, although their red brick design is more reminiscent of the Stone Keep Mist dungeon than the 3 keeps of retail. Incidentally, the 3 keeps style design, a blackened outer brickwork, had already been used in the Alpha in the previous roundabout map section. Moving down to the first keep, Kain will be assailed by werewolves. These are not seen in this section in the retail version, and are usually associated with secret areas such as the Lightning Dungeon and the Lost City, the latter of which doesn't even exist in this build. With the gate beneath blocked, it's necessary to visit the first building. Whereas in the retail version, the Blood Gout keep is the first to be visited. In this version, the first building is the Mind Control dungeon, although the first thing to note is that the doorway is slightly misaligned. The Mind Control dungeon, like some other dungeons, is broadly similar to its retail counterpart, with a number of small changes, mostly to do with extra decorations. Although one noticeable aspect is that in the retail version, most of the enemy classes are upgraded, featuring more powerful colour variants of the classes seen in the Alpha. The initial room with the mural is fairly plain in the Alpha, whereas in the retail there are a number of decorative weapons on the wall and in a nearby barrel. A save altar room has also been added here in the retail that's not present in the Alpha. Moving into the main chamber, and again there are several stylistic changes, with the Alpha missing much of the wall artifacts and other decorative elements that are seen in retail. As with the retail, the impression seems to be that the player is intended to grab the spell, use it to open the door and leave the dungeon again.
This spell allows me to enslave my enemies, giving me control of their bodies. When I release my grip, their bodies will shrivel and die as I displace their souls and replace them with my own.
Although the mechanism in the Alpha is somewhat bugged and can leave Kain locked in the dungeon with no exit. The rest of the dungeon is dedicated to secrets, which of course don't count in the status screen in the Alpha. The side balconies do not have the spikes seen in retail, and in places railings are used instead, while the arrangement of spikes in the wings is also different.
Should this object strike an enemy, rot and decay would instantly eat their flesh and leave only a pool of blood and tissue. For a time after, the toxins are still active and therefore lethal to the touch.
Railings are also used at the high platform with the mind control card. The room also lacks the floor symbol on the top balcony. The lower back room also has open balconies that are hemmed in with spikes in retail, but aside from minor spike and dimensional changes, it's largely the same as its retail counterpart.
Reputed to have been ripped from the chest of the greatest vampire to have ever existed, Janos Audron, the Heart of Darkness restores vampiric unlife. It can be used over and over again, but always consumes magical energy from the one who uses it. Life is precious, Janos discovered, as it was torn, throbbing and bleeding from his own body.
The hidden upper back room has similar changes, with open balconies and occasional railings that are replaced by spike pits in the retail version, along with the addition of extra decorative barrels and wall-mounted armaments. The top area of the room that can be reached is particularly notable, as it just contains a single patch of high railing protecting an alcove in the Alpha, whereas the retail version has a spike pit below, several decorative elements, and a thin balcony running the entire length of the top room, which is backed by spikes and has a single line of spikes running across the top, isolating the alcove. That alcove has the backdoor teleporter to the antitoxin forge and a switch in retail, but in the Alpha it's just a floor room and a power-up. The side rooms leading further back have their own changes. Again, decorative elements are missing, and the left passage has some rearranged shooters.
And the back door entrance to the energy bank forge is also not present.
It also has an arrangement of timed spikes that are not seen in retail. Interestingly, the Alpha uses actual spike pits which turn to floor, rather than the regular timed spike flooring.
A medley of death and evisceration. Let fate choose my enemy's demise. This spell allows me to enslave my enemies, giving me control of their bodies. When I release my grip, their bodies will shrivel and die as I displace their souls and replace them with my own.
Once the Control Mine dungeon is completed, Kain can progress through the gate and pass the Bat Beacon to the next building. Although the doorway is not connected to the interior, a few indicators, including the ultimate retail arrangement, suggest this should be the Blood Gout dungeon. Its interiors do exist in the game files, but the warp to the area in the level select doesn't work. We can use technical tricks to access these areas, but they're so buggy as to render them almost unplayable, although we can examine the maps. The maps reveal that the Blood Gout dungeon is broadly similar to its retail counterpart, with much the same layout. But some rooms notably have some altered dimensions, such as the width of corridors, and there are some subtle decoration changes, such as the addition of wall switches. The first map area is missing the side save altar, which is added for retail and gains a pair of flame-topped columns alongside the entrance mural. The following area, where Kain collected the spell card, was virtually the same as retail, although the exit doorway was closer to the centre of the chamber and a staircase was positioned behind it. Dimension changes were also apparent in the third chamber, with this affecting the size and amount of spikes in some areas. Several spike pits are missing, which were added later on, and there's notably glitched or unfinished floor in the middle of the chamber. Railings are also seen around stairs and balconies, which are removed from the final game. The first chamber with a water pit is much more open in the alphas, with a small spike pit preventing players walking around the balconies. Walls were moved inward to create alcoves and force players across the bridge in later versions. Again, railings were present that would be removed in later versions. Moving on after the Blood Gout dungeon, there is only one way to go, down to the final keep. Again, this doorway is not connected, so we can't be completely sure, but the indications are that this should be the Flame Sword dungeon. Again, the interiors are present in the files, and this time the level select warp functions, so it is possible to explore the dungeon. The Flame Sword Keep starts with an area that is different from its retail successor. In the Alpha, we find a simple square room with 2 doors and the Flame Sword mural, whereas the retail expands the room into a T-shape and adds an additional door to reach the new Save Altar room. In both cases, the open left doorway of the pair is the one to take to progress. The next map area features a set of hay-filled rooms leading away from the initial doors. There are also some Fire Mage enemies present in the Alpha, which are absent from the retail version. In the Alpha, this map area is actually combined with the final rooms coming back to the right doorway, whereas the 2 pathways are split in retail. In any case, there's not much to choose between the versions, save for a few above door decorations in retail. The next area starts off as dark in the Alpha, but has much the same layout as the retail, save for a few door decorations. An extra floor switch room is present in the Alpha, which opens the door to the south. That door is already open in retail. This leads into the vast pyramid area. This again is very similar to the retail version. However, the puzzle with the lights and switches works a little differently. In retail, all of the switches on the top level must be activated to reach the lower area and activate the bridges to the side power-ups. but then the green switches must be deactivated and those on the lower level activated to gain access to the flame sword. For the Alpha, attempting to activate all switches will raise the side staircases, preventing access to the side power-ups, and since the switches can't be reactivated, this will stop them being gained. To gain them, and complete the puzzle to gain the flame sword, it's necessary to avoid the green switches entirely, with the top red switches alone opening access to the lower area.
Save Victor! Save Victor!
Once the flame sword is gained, we can backtrack to the previous area and take the now illuminated side doorway. The next few areas are again darkened in the Alpha version, and the flame sword igniting the hay can be useful in illuminating the room. Notably, the enemies here are mostly fire mages as opposed to the zombies seen in retail. But aside from this, much of the area is identical.
Save Victor! Save Victor!
Pressing on takes us back to the area behind the initial doors, but on a different path. Again, this was a separate area in the retail version, but the Alpha has it combined with the initial outgoing path. The layout is virtually the same, but the Alpha has a series of hay piles that are absent from the retail, with enemies again exchanged or missing. The final door takes us back to the right door at the beginning, where we can go back out to the Termogent Forest. Before we move off, it's worth noting that there's a large muddy patch behind the trees in the top right of this map tile, which leads up a patchy trail to a blank wall. As with previous sections, this could be evidence of planned developments, as in the retail version, the Flamesorb dungeon ends up in this area, while the Blood Gout dungeon occupies the bottom space. Another thing worthy of note is that there are no caves or doorways in the area. In the retail version, Blood Fountain for Strength and the main entrances to the Spirit Forges of Energy Bolt and Antitoxin were found in this area. In this version, all can be accessed from the level select, but both the Blood Fountain and the Energy Bolt Forge are not connected to external areas. The Antitoxin Forge is actually found in a keep in the previous roundabout map tile. Attempting to move off the south of this map section actually crashes the game, and this appears to be something of a break in the alpha. But the next area is the outside of Vorador's mansion. Join us next time as we explore Vorador's mansion and the chess match.